Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on e-cargo bikes. My name is Llynnos Brown, and I'm a research fellow at the University of Leeds, and I'll be your chair for today's session. The topic of today's session is really important and particularly timely. Today is National Clean Air Day, and a day where we have seen the publication of a report which shows a quarter of school children go to schools where air pollution is over the world health limit, which I'd love to say I'm shocked at, but unfortunately it doesn't come as a massive surprise to me. We live in a car-dependent society, and the transport sector needs to urgently reduce emissions, decarbonise and reach net zero, not just for environmental reasons, but for the health of all of us and our children. But being a bit more optimistic, I think e-cargo bikes present a real opportunity to make a difference here. As a researcher, I'm currently involved in a longitudinal research project which is looking at the effects of the pandemic is having on transport and what travel might look like in the future. And some of the findings in our work show that a lot of the barriers that people cite as reasons for not cycling more could be overcome with e-cargo bikes. So it'll be really interesting to hear about the social, leisure and family case studies that all our speakers will be discussing today. So a few formalities to go over before I introduce our speakers and start today's session. During the first 30 minutes, we're going to be hearing from each of our 4 speakers, and we will then get them all together at the end for a discussion Q&A session. And this is where all of you come in. We want this session to be as interactive as we can make it. So if you have any questions that you'd like to pose to any of the speakers, please put them in the questions box. And you can do this at any point throughout the presentations, and I'll put these to the speakers during the discussion and Q&A session. So we've got a really good lineup of speakers today who are going to provide a range of perspectives on e-cargo bikes. First up, we'll hear from Alex Stredwick, who is the founder and director of Carry Me Bikes. Then we'll hear from Chris Leakey, director of Bambino Biking. Then you'll hear from Bryn Lewis and Becky Marston from the Active Wellbeing Society. Bryn is the community delivery manager, and Becky is the new cycling business project manager. And then finally, we'll hear from Ed Hegram, the commercial partnership manager at Raleigh UK. So last thing before we start, just like to remind you all and encourage you all to put questions that you have in the question box as we go through the presentations. If you've got a question that you'd like to ask a particular speaker, please put the name at the start of it, as this will help me direct them to the right speaker during the Q&A. So let's get started. First up is Alex Stredwick, founder and director of Carry Me Bikes. Over to you, Alex.
Hi, thank you so much for the introduction and thanks for inviting me to the seminar. So yeah, my name's Alex and I'm the founding director of Carry Me Bikes. We're a community interest company and we basically sell and hire out cargo bikes and e-cargo bikes, and we also do a number of community projects. Next slide, please. So this is basically what I'm going to go through in the next few minutes. Firstly, why I set up Carry Me. Secondly, some families and cargo bikes information and lots of lovely pictures. Thirdly, some information about the COVID-19 year and a bit that we've had and the community cargo bikes experiences that happened at that point with us. And finally, I will dip into our usual community work and I'll explain about the modifications we did using cargo bikes to get around the lockdown and still manage to help members of the community. Next slide, please. So why did I set up Carry Me Bikes? So I've always come from a very much of a sort of green background, kind of worrying about the planet and our health, and I feel that cycling really helps on both of those levels. And I come from a background in transport policy where I worked in sustainable transport. Essentially, I became very aware about gender politics in transport. Overall, all the National Travel Survey data and a lot of TfL data as well shows that overall, on average, women do make different types of journeys to men. This throws up lots of challenges. If you're trip chaining lots of trips for lots of different purposes, and you've got very small children that you need to bring along or pick up or drop off, it's very different from a really simple commute to A to B and then B to A again, which tends to be what very traditional transport planning can basically provides for. I felt that parents and young families were being ignored in the transport picture, especially when it came to helping people cycle more. And my experience was, I'm not a mum myself, but my experience I observed, and with my friends and family and so on, people were giving up cycling as a form of transport when they started a family. They just couldn't work out how to do that, especially when child number 2 comes along. Hackney was pretty much crying out for it. That's where I live now, and that's where I was working. It famously has quite a high proportion of people cycling to work. It was about 14% at the time when I set up Carry Me bikes. And really, we aim to do a lot of help with young families, help people make those sort of escort journeys with young children. We sell and we hire out cargo bikes, as well as doing the community projects. Next slide, please. So families and cargo bikes, it's really important to point out that these are not just a leisure tool, these are not just a bit of fun, these are absolutely essential vehicles in families' lives. There's a quote here, using the bike is so simple, it's become an integral part of our lives, we can't manage without it now. They become completely dependent on their cargo bikes, just like people do become dependent on their cars, but obviously cargo bikes are also fun, they keep you fit, and they give you fresh air and an interaction with the local community in the way that being stuck in a car just doesn't. Next slide, please. And what we found during COVID-19 was that the demand for cargo bikes and e-cargo bikes absolutely rocketed from our community. We had amazing people in the local community coming forward to help their neighbours with delivering food and so on. I'll mention that a little bit a few slides on. But the overwhelming demand to hire and to buy cargo bikes, it really rocketed, and we worked extremely hard to meet that demand. And what I really noticed was that people were becoming kind of more normal. It wasn't just the the avid cyclist. You don't need to wear any special clothing for most of these cargo bikes, and people kind of look pretty normal, basically. Next slide, please. Yeah, there's some more normal people here. Basically, they look normal to me, and a lot of our customers like to wear. Next slide, please. Yeah, definitely normal. They're normal rabbit ears. They're normal people. They're just normal people wanting bikes. And yeah, a lot of our customers, they are really, really appreciative of our try before you buy scheme. It's kind of like a matchmaking service. We match the people with a cargo bike. We find their perfect cargo bike. I wouldn't say, I don't like using the word expensive. They are high value items within family life, and people like to make the right decision there. So next slide, please. So within the COVID-19 experience, as I say, we had lots of people coming forward to help the local community, and these are some examples. We had Tower Hamlets Council, their refugee service, hired out some of our bikes to do essential deliveries to vulnerable people. Edible London is a lovely charity up in Stamford Hill. They were working with Sustrans to do deliveries as well, and they're also using one of our cargo bikes. They bought one of our cargo bikes. Next slide, please. Where we're based is around Chapel Old Schoolrooms in Hackney, and they were doing a huge programme of delivery to vulnerable people, and they used one of our cargo bikes, which we look after this one for the London Cycling Campaign. And also Walthamstow Toy Library, they couldn't run their events where people come and borrow the toys from them for obvious reasons, so they did deliveries using one of our cargo bikes. Next slide, please. We also had Hackney Playbus. They developed a lovely scheme with delivering books to local parents stuck inside with small children, going slightly mad, children needing things to do. So they did a wonderful delivery program, and we helped them with that. And also here's Vincent, the Zero Hero. He set up a wonderful company. He was setting it up anyway, I think, and it just came into its own during the lockdowns. It's a low packaging food delivery which goes to local shops. It doesn't use supermarkets, it uses independents, and he delivers it all by e-cargo bike. He does an amazing job. And moving on really to some more brief sort of small business examples. Yes, next slide, please. Thank you. We've got Growing Underground here, there on the left here. They deliver salads in South London, in Brixton. They use sustainable energy to grow lots of food underground. It's amazing. And they're moving away from using their van and starting to use electric cargo bikes. And on the right, you've got Andy here, came to us recently. We've got these lovely Raleigh cargo bikes. So and they can take, this one in particular, up to 100 kilos in the box, 900 litre capacity. It's pretty slow, even though it's got electric assist. You can't really rock it along on it, and you've got to take corners slowly, but it's a fantastic vehicle, and they've been extremely popular since we've started to stock the Raleigh Pro Bike and Pro Trike. Next slide, please. So pre-COVID, we had a number of community projects. One of them was baby biking with the London Borough of Waltham Forest. Essentially, as you can see from the slide, we used to run masterclasses on how to carry our children safely by bicycle, and we used cargo bikes to get all of the kit to the sessions, and it was more about helping people to use their own bikes and modify their own bikes. Of course, we couldn't do any of those events. All the events were cancelled, so we did a delivery service. We did WhatsApp and Skype meetings with parents, and then we worked out what equipment would be best for them, and then we did a whole bunch of delivery events, and then they could borrow the kit for a month or possibly more. So that worked really well. Next slide, please. And also another of the projects that we often run is called, we ran before COVID and we've continued to run, is called the Mums and Babes by Bike project. And this focuses on refurbishing standard bicycles. And in the past, we've used our e-cargo bikes to gather the abandoned bicycles that have been donated. We've managed to, with the hard work of our mechanics, get them up into running order. They're very much the low frame, step through ladies type bike examples, which is absolutely essential when you've got a child on the back. You need to have a step-through frame to be able to get on and off safely, and we usually kit them out with baskets, making them practical and double stands so that they're safe when you're putting the kid on and off. All these things not necessarily thought of with standard bicycles for sale. So we've managed to carry on with that as well, and we focused on key workers last year. So we helped some NHS workers and some others who were again stuck in lockdown, and we managed to continue with that one. We're really pleased about that. And I think it really goes to show, just sort of wrapping up, coming towards the end here, really goes to show that there's loads and loads of demand for people out there to carry their kids by bike, and also for community use and for small businesses as well. And as policymakers and also as businesses who step in to fill gaps, we can, there's a lot we need to do. We need to change the environment. We need to make it much easier for people to carry small children by bike safely. There's so much to improve out there, and we've proven really how popular it is ourselves and others. Yeah, there's a lot more that we can do to help mums and dads and other caregivers in this field. So final slide, please. Yeah, just wanted to say thank you. Follow us on Instagram and Twitter, and we're also on Facebook. Tend to do the most on Instagram. It's quite easy to find us. I think we're carrying the underscore bikes in Instagram, and you can easily find us on Twitter. And that's our email address, and you can give us a call. And I hopefully, yeah, look forward to hearing from you if you want to find out more or get involved in some way in what we do.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Alex. That was fascinating, and it's great to hear about Carry Me Bikes. Sounds like you've been really innovative and having a massive impact on the local society and local area. I loved how you said that people are becoming dependent on their e-cargo bikes. This is definitely a win, and it's amazing. So well done. Looking forward to, we've got some questions coming in already for you, so keep them coming to all the audience members. And we'll put them to the panelists at the end. So next up, we've got Chris Leakey, Director of Bambino Biking. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Alex. That was a great talk. Alex and I have never met, but I've sort of seen everything that she's been doing down in London, and we're based up in Manchester, and we've got some similar stories. So as I said, I'm Chris Leakey, and I started Bambino Biking as a voluntary project, and it's now grown into a business that hires and sells cargo and utility cycling equipment, and it also runs trial and advice events in Manchester. This talk is essentially a snapshot of my story on what I call my accidental business. So I was a stay-at-home dad. I'd left my career in youth development, and I was having a great time cycling around with my kids, going to parks and having picnics. And people kept stopping me and asking what was the trailer, and they wanted to know more. I met another cycling parent in the park, and then Bambino Biking was born. It started with sessions in the park for free on Monday afternoons, and we were just helping parents get cycling with their children, mainly with bike seats and trailers. It grew in popularity, and people started asking me to run these trial and advice sessions, as we called them, in their park and for their events, and they were willing to pay as well. The event started with local community groups and councils, and then organisations like British Cycling and Cycling UK, and more recently Transport for Greater Manchester, started asking us to run these kind of sessions. As much as possible, we try to do these events using cargo bikes, so everything was transported on the cargo bike and cargo trailer there. And it was often much easier to get to places. There's these examples here of, getting to these sort of traffic-free environments where we were setting up, and it was much harder to get there in a van and much easier on a bike. After about a year, Bambino Biking officially became a business, and this was around about the time I joined with Manchester Bike Hire, who were also local champions of utility cycling and cargo bikes. We started with a family cycling library that hired out bike seats and trailers, and this was and still is popular, but it's never been particularly good for making a living, as a lot of people end up buying second-hand or finding cheaper options online. Cargo bikes were becoming more and more popular, and so we decided to focus more on selling these. We were able to offer demos at the trial and advice sessions and at the shop, and we started to offer a 1-week hire of the cargo bikes for £100. This was really valued, as the cargo bikes are a big investment for the majority of people, and finding out if the bike works for you and your family is really important. A great example is one customer hiring a trike and finding it wouldn't fit through her gate. So she returned the bike, got the gate widened, and then came back for a hire a few months later. The trial went really well, and then she ended up buying a cargo trike for her family. Now, as a business, we're trying to balance the need to make a living and support people who want to make a change to use their bikes as their primary means of transport. The behaviour change works takes time, but it's important. We don't have a strong utility cycling culture yet in the UK, and it will take time and effort to change this. I took this rather dark picture at a local supermarket. A local friend who also cycled as his main means of transport saw me with my 2 kids and a week's worth of shopping. At seeing all the stuff, he said, "Have you bought the car today?" And I was just so taken back, because I thought this person would know and understand what was capable, that it was possible to fit these 2 kids and all that shopping on a cargo bike quite happily. It was a great reminder that we still have a long way to make utility cycling normal. These are a few pictures of kind of things that you can carry, and the bottom one, don't worry, I didn't squash my daughter with the Christmas tree. She was just a bit camera shy that day. So now we are looking for ways to expand our offering with commercial and supported or subsidised projects that help people get access to cargo bikes to try for personal as well as business use. One of these is e-hubs. We'll have a trial at e-hub starting in Manchester later this year. I'm really excited by these. It is planned that you'll be able to hire by the hour a cargo bike or a car from these hubs. I believe this project will go a long way to help normalise cargo bike use in Manchester, and can't wait for it to start. Having more car clubs might not be the first thing that comes to your mind for reducing car dependency and getting more people on bikes, but it has the huge potential to do so. An example I give is when my petrol car died. We went car free for a while and cycling most places was fine, but occasionally we needed to go further and a car was the best choice for this. However, the nearest car club was 3 miles from our house. This was too far for it to be really useful, as we had to take a taxi or walk a long way to get there. This, combined with old and unreliable trains on my wife's commute, meant that we ended up buying a new car. So alongside these other kind of projects, in order for I guess cargo bikes and cycling to become mainstream, the barriers need addressing, so that we can convince people to try something new, like cycling to the shops or taking the kids to swimming. And the experience needs to be really good. So if they meet infrastructure like this, it's another barrier that essentially is going to turn them away from what could have been a really good experience. Bad infrastructure and feeling unsafe is one of the biggest reasons people I speak to don't want to try or stop cycling after the first try. And these are examples of this where we've got some kind of good infrastructure, but then it's sort of hindered by people parking in the road or cones blocking it. However, hopefully by continuing to support families with behaviour change projects, fixing the infrastructure issues with schemes like the B network that we're going to have or is in development in Manchester, and having a joined up public transport network with shared mobility options, we can make cycling and cargo bikes a natural transport choice. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you very much, Chris. Being in Manchester myself, I've spotted you in the parks and bits and pieces like that, and there's definitely a lot of people interested in them when you sort of go past the stands in, I think, is it Alexandra Park and maybe Plattfields?
We started in Plattfields Park, and then yeah, we did when we joined up with the British Cycling Let's Ride pop-up. We ended up doing sort of tours around different parks, and yeah, we've been to quite a few places, which has been wonderful.
No, it's fab to see, and yeah, really, really interesting, and I think I'll be in touch with you after. But moving on to keep to time, next up we've got Bryn Lewis and Becky Marston from the Active Wellbeing Society. Bryn is the Community Delivery Manager and Becky is the New Cycling Business Project Manager. So I think Bryn's starting, so over to you, Bryn.
Hi everybody, actually Becky's starting first.
No problems. Hello everyone, apologies that you can't see me. I'm having troubles with my camera today, but myself and Bryn are going to talk to you a little bit about the Active Wellbeing Society and how we've been using cargo bikes in the community. Next slide please. Okay, so the Active Wellbeing Society, we're a community benefit society and a cooperative, and we work within the West Midlands and more recently wider afield. And we're helping to build healthy, happy communities that live active and connected lives. We co-design interventions that people living in the most vulnerable areas need. So that includes food provision, a big active travel offer, a physical activity offer. We do a lot of work around the sharing economy. We have data and insight specialists and a massive health intervention team. So we have a team of social prescribers and we prescribe bikes and cycling and walking as part of our health initiatives. We're the people behind Big Birmingham Bikes, if you've heard of that. So we've been able to give 7,000 bikes away in Birmingham completely free to those living in areas of deprivation. In terms of e-cargo bikes, back in the start of 2020, Birmingham City Council got in touch with us and said we're going to be applying for some money for some e-cargo bikes as part of the Energy Saving Trust DFT grant. Would you be interested in any and helping us run this pilot? And of course we said yes, absolutely. So we're in receipt of 4 Raleigh cargo bikes, 2 trikes and 2 two-wheelers, and we've started deploying them to reduce our own reliance on diesel vans, and also to support community groups that wouldn't otherwise be able to access these. We've received some additional funding from our Clean Air Zone and our Brumbury's campaign, and that's enabled us to be able to offer training to the other organisations that are hosting these bikes around the city. And we've got a range of people that are having them, businesses, public services, universities and community groups are all accessing them. We've been able to go out and provide some cycle training for them. We've also built and we're maintaining the bikes in partnership with Raleigh. Next slide, please. I'll hand over to Bri.
Hi, everybody. Building on what Becky was saying, one of the things that was really important to us as an organisation was to work with communities across the city and to gain a real feel what the obstacles were for cycling in general, but also in moving equipment and people and children and items around the city. And also, just as we were starting to do that, COVID started, and so the asks from the community were quite stark and very different, and a change from getting active to needing food. So the cargo bikes that we've had from Birmingham City Council that are all Raleigh cargo bikes have been a real godsend to people, and for many are symbols of hope in Birmingham, as they've enabled us to deliver food parcels and hygiene packs. More recently, testing kits. Some of our partners in the city centre have been using them to distribute testing kits to homeless people on the streets and families who couldn't afford things like food, clothes. So these bikes have made a real difference. And not only that, they've been able to get into the parts of Birmingham where vans and cars couldn't reach, but also they've turned heads in terms of us even attempting to do some of that with cargo bikes. So that's been a real learning curve for us. Latterly, we've been involved in the infamous or the famous low traffic neighbourhoods that you will know a lot about all over the country. And the cargo bikes have enabled us to help communities to transport planting and gardening supplies and water to the planters to enable them to brighten up their communities. There was a news article the other day, which we were really proud of, which said that 50% of people are in favour of LTNs and 50% aren't. And when we started on that work, it was 0 in favour. So we're really proud of the fact we've managed to do that, and the cargo bikes played a big part in that. They're also have helped us to loan sports equipment, cooking supplies, and they are based at our community share shacks to allow communities to borrow them as well. We use them to engage with our networks, to allow us to get around quicker, but also to allow us to distribute community leaflets. And what we've used the bikes for is a programme of community training, which have enabled us to train people from the poorest communities to use the cargo bikes and to build their confidence. And then they've allowed us to build a large volunteering offer. So what I'm going to do is share some case studies with you of 3 of those. Go to the next slide, please. So as I said before, a symbol of hope. One of the big asks around Christmas last year was that as a result of lockdown and loss of wages, there were huge numbers of families and children who weren't going to have toys and any treats of any sort at Christmas. So we were asked to help distribute a whole network of treat bags and toys to families around just before Christmas using the bikes. As you can see, they were all jazzed up with tinsel, and the people who took them had Christmas hats on, and it really brightened up the week leading up to Christmas for a lot of those families. And some of the comments that we had back from people were they just couldn't believe that we could get enough organisations together through a network in Birmingham called Brum Together to use the cargo bikes to move those around the city. Next slide, please. So without our training partners, this wouldn't have been possible. So what we did as soon as we got the cargo bikes, as well as using them ourselves as the Active Wellbeing Society, was that we put appeals out to organisations all around Birmingham, and we had some fantastic responses from organisations. This one in particular is Oasis Academy, and we're going to hear from Megan shortly. But for now, she She was on a networking event, and we discussed they have 2 food pantries that are a mile apart, and they were doing 20 or 30 journeys per week in a van to move supplies around between the 2. So you can imagine the effect of an old diesel van on air quality. They've replaced that now completely with a cargo bike, and there's lots of benefits they're getting, and Megan will tell us a little bit about those shortly in the video. So next slide, please. The other huge benefit of what has happened over COVID is that we've had huge numbers of volunteers. A lot of them have been on furlough, like Adam. Adam actually by trade is a violinist in the Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, and for obvious reasons wasn't able to practice that trade. So he came to us and said he was really interested in cycling. Was there anything we could do? So we linked him up with the cargo bikes as they'd arrived, and Adam's been instrumental in testing the bikes for us before we put other volunteers on them. But also he's been giving us feedback on road conditions and all those sort of things. And Dom has used this bike for all sorts of things. And you can read his words there in terms of what he's been doing. But he's really transformed the experience, and he's probably been the person who's had the most people stop him and ask what the bike's all about and what the project's all about. Next slide, please. Most recently, the bike has made a huge difference to our wild projects. And my colleague Marcus Belbin has been using the cargo bike to transport supplies in and out of community orchards, woodland, and spaces around tower blocks. Whereas before he couldn't do that. He used to try and transport trees on his bike and in his rucksack because he doesn't drive. And the cargo bike has transformed that. And it's allowed him to get to really critical places. So that's been fabulous. Next slide, please. And it's back over to Becky.
Thanks, Bryn. So we're now looking at how we use our bikes more and get them to replace more of our van journeys, and hopefully get rid of some of our vans and be more reliant on e-cargo. We're continuing to build our links with community groups and share the bikes as much as we can, so as many people can benefit from them. We're continuing our training for partner organisations and driving more volunteers into the sector. But our ultimate goal is to embed that community use and to use it to support economic regeneration. So we're looking at how we leverage in some funding to set up a work-led cooperative so that communities can not only use them for their community benefit, but actually they can develop their own small business or community enterprise to take on sort of last mile logistics and create some money within the system to be able to pay themselves a fair wage. And we're looking at how we support that so that we sort of embed the use of e-cargos and help them to grow themselves. We're going to see a short video from Megan, who's one of our community partners, just talking about her use of the bike. Next slide.
Okay, when you're ready.
Hi there, I'm Megan Tucker. I'm from Oasis Community Hubs Foundry in Bolton, in Winson Green and Handsworth, and we've got some fabulous volunteers and lots of projects going. Here they all are. And we've got a pantry which involves picking up food, delivering food, basically moving food from one place to another more times than, well, I've got lots of grey hair as a result of it. So we're really looking forward to using these bikes to just cut out some of those shorter journeys. We've had a fabulous time today, lots of fun amongst all of us, everyone's smiling, especially Beatrice. And just really looking forward to getting these on the road in our community and then putting them to lots of use. So because we work with lots of different organisations that are very local to us, the bike's going to be brilliant for popping over to the Wildlife Trust and taking some equipment or plants over, or then bringing it back to us. We're trying to set up a project where we use coffee grinds in a composting project, so going around some of the local cafes and collecting the coffee grinds, and possibly even some of their food waste to put in our composters. And then also just between the two schools, quite often we're carting food back and forth, so it would be great to be able to not have to take my big van, but to be able to just go up on the bike. Even better would be great when Ruth has to take the bike, or Beatrice, or Kieran, and I can just meet them there. So yeah, brilliant. Sharing the responsibility, and we're all getting fit in the process too.
Cool.
So that's our presentation, and we'd love to hear from everybody. You can contact us at theactivewellbeingsociety.org. Many thanks.
Thanks so much, Becky and Bryn. That was great to actually see some people in a video of people actually using the e-bike. And I loved how you said it was a symbol of hope during the pandemic. Again, great to see how a bike can kind of create this. So thank you very much. Just like to remind all the sort of latecomers to the session that you are able to pose any questions to the speakers, and I'd encourage you to do this in the question box. We've already got some great questions, so keep them coming through. So we'll just move on to the final speaker for today, which is Ed Pegram, Commercial Partnership Manager for Raleigh UK. So over to you, Ed.
Thank you. Yeah, lots of really great messages there. And, you know, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about Raleigh, some of the changes that have happened over the last 4 or 5 years, and give an example of how we're helping different organisations commit and get to their climate or carbon reduction goals by use of cargo bike. So next slide, please. So I'm just going to whiz through these. So hopefully everyone would have heard of Raleigh. We've got over 130 years of heritage in the UK. We're still based in Nottingham, which is really quite important for us. We've had our roots there since day one. Around 5 or 6 years ago, we were taken over by the Excel Group, which has huge benefits. There's a number of brands that sit under Raleigh UK Limited, and we've also got a parts and accessories distribution business. So we've got a real backing behind us, and this backing of Excel Group allows us to share technology so that the product that we put out is the best that it can be. Next slide, please. Yeah, it's no secret that Raleigh has really high brand recognition, and again, some of the ways that we've changed over the last few years is really condensing the range of bikes that we have and really focusing on families and urban mobility, folding bikes, classic ladies bikes, and that's a really interesting change in consumer trends that's happened, particularly since the pandemic. We've seen an enormous growth in women's cycling, and like Alex was mentioning, it's definitely filtered across to cargo bikes, which is really positive. Next slide, please. So exactly as it says, the heron's head is pretty recognizable. Hopefully everyone would have seen it and recognized it, and the brand is really well known. And like I said, we stand for quality and affordable bikes that are available for everyone, and cargo is an expansion of that. Next slide, please. Again, just some really iconic bikes that you might recognize. Next slide, please. And again, really how the range has developed. So, you know, in moving from the 60s, we focused on kids bikes and BMX, and it turned to utility bikes in the late 90s and the early 2000s. And really now, there's been an enormous drive in electric bikes. So a lot of technology for the bicycle hasn't changed apart from the electrification, which just makes things enormously easy, particularly on the cargo bikes, to carry heavier loads and certainly people a lot further with ease. It also makes things a lot more fun. Next slide, please. So really, this is what I wanted to talk about. So our partnership with the National Trust was rolled out just a few weeks ago, but the bikes have been on the ground around 6 weeks. It's been a really interesting project to work on. So the National Trust as an organisation has committed to be carbon neutral by 2030, and they're making lots of steps to achieve this goal, and one of them is looking at two things. One is around how employees move in and around site, but also thinking about how visitors get to site as well, which is really important. And initially, the cargo bikes and the electric bikes that we have donated to the National Trust will be used for well, everything employee based in and around site. And there's been some really interesting results just out of the first few weeks of trial. So there's some really nice examples of how the bikes are being used there. The ambition is to reduce carbon emissions. Obviously, there's lots of transport and movement in and around site. So, you know, switching that movement by vehicle to a cargo bike or electric bike can make things more efficient. It's obviously zero emissions, which is a huge benefit. There's also noise reduction as well. So there's an element of visitor experience to consider. You know, no one really wants a noisy four-wheel drive hurtling by them when they're trying to enjoy the lovely estates that the National Trust have. And a really valid point to pick up there is one of the focuses is to create green corridors for people from towns and cities. And I think that's really important to consider, both in this project and for other organisations. You know, we've spoken about urban movement of goods. We've spoken about urban transport for people and families and women in particular. But actually, I think cargo bikes could play a really important role in transporting goods and equipment, or whatever it might be, and even people for rural into urban settings. I think it could connect communities. It could allow families that perhaps would otherwise get public transport or whatever it might be, or you know, even walking. Actually, the bike can be a really efficient way of moving people and things around. Next slide, please. So, as I mentioned, you know, COVID, although it's been a pretty terrible time for many, it's really accelerated the need for transport, both individual and organisations, that is greener, cleaner, and in some cases more efficient. And again, like I said, a lot of the focus of this has been on urban movement, and certainly they have a place there where, you know, London, for example, traffic speeds, the average is about 9 miles an hour. But there's a massive increase in segregated cycle lanes. So the efficiency of cargo bikes in urban areas is really important. But, you know, COVID has also led to lots of people being more active. So it's considering how organisations and individuals and even families move about generally. For the National Trust, their overarching aims are to reduce the reliance on traditional vehicles that they would use to get around site. And we had a really interesting day at Lime House in just south of Manchester. And the two things that really struck me from that day were that the gate to the house is around a mile. And they had a ranger that would travel that mile and back twice a day in a diesel powered vehicle. And subsequently, that's now being done on a bike and sometimes a cargo bike if rubbish needs to be collected from the gatehouse, which is just, you know, amazing. That bike has actually done 64 miles in the first few weeks. So, you know, as confidence grows and the organisation integrates the bikes more into sort of daily routine, then that number will definitely grow. So that's a really positive start. And the second thing that really struck me was efficiency. So between the catering, where the catering is done, and the main house is probably 500 yards. and currently that was done either by walking or occasionally in a van when it's needed. And the thing that really struck me there was how efficient the bike could be in that scenario. So, you know, like I mentioned previously, it wasn't disturbing visitors. You know, it's not costing them anything, so the van doesn't need to be running. It's really quiet, and it's much faster than walking. So the efficiency of them in many different scenarios can have a really positive commercial impact, as well as, you know, the impact on the user themselves. And actually, we've had some really good feedback from the employees of the National Trust, and, you know, lots of people that are perhaps skeptical and perhaps see them as a bit of a gimmick. Actually, when they try them, often you can't get them off the bikes. So, you know, the electrification element of the e-cargo bikes makes it a little bit more fun and makes them easier to maneuver and get around. And you know, they've been received really well. So actually, the well-being factor is something that's often overlooked. And I think, you know, just being out in the fresh air for these employees and out of vehicles, most importantly, is a really, really important thing. I've got a couple more slides, so next slide, please. I really like this image. So this was one of the bikes that we trialed. And just to give you an overview of the project with the National Trust, they've got 11 sites. We're focused on improving the health and well-being of the employees. Like I mentioned, 64 miles travelled in the first few weeks, which is great. And really important thing to take away from this is, you know, we've spoken about families using cargo bikes in cities and businesses as well. And actually, I think for businesses or employees using bikes at work, one thing we've had feedback on is the fact that they are now encouraged to cycle, be more active with the family, and generally live a more active lifestyle outside of work, which is really great feedback. And there's a quote there from one of the facilities managers at Lime, and, you know, he was pretty overwhelmed with the response that the bikes had into the organisation, which is great. Next slide, please. And of course, you know, with the gear change document, there is lots of factors, and, you know, I could talk all day about how great cargo bikes are and how we need to use them more, but there's been some really nice messages today about all sorts of different things. I think one takeaway from me was the encouragement of, or empowering women to get onto cargo bikes, or generally electric bikes or any bikes. Like I said, we've seen a massive uptake in cycling, particularly through our Cycle to Work scheme, of more women purchasing bikes, which is great news, because I think previously cycling might have been seen as a pretty male-dominated thing to do, but it's definitely changing. And I think there's the leisure element of both electric bikes and cargo bikes, but really, I think we need to consider the commercial elements and the commercial gains that businesses and organisations can have through the introduction of cargo bikes. And that's me. Thank you.
Great, thanks very much, Ed. Raleigh Chopper bring back lots of memories, I'm sure, for people. And definitely, it's great to see that Raleigh are kind of developing and continuing to develop with this new sort of transport, hopefully different world that we're getting, and with the new technology with e-cargo bikes. So great to hear from all of our speakers today, and we've been given so many different examples of where e-cargo bikes can not just help logistically on a personal and maybe business perspective and community perspective, but also really improve kind of health and well-being. And it was great to hear from Ed there about how, you know, e-bikes, e-cargo bikes being used in a workplace, having these knock-on effects in the kind of personal realm. So that's grand, that's great. So I'd just like to invite all the speakers to turn their cameras back on, and we've got lots of different questions to ask you all. I'll pick some nice ones for you all. So because we were kept to time, and I thank you very much for that. But I just thought I'd start by asking each of you putting cost aside, what do you think is the sort of main barrier to people adopting e-cargo bikes, and what do you think could be done to kind of remove that barrier? So if we go through the speakers in order of you presented, so Alex, do you want to start?
Yeah, it's a difficult question really, because obviously I deal with people who do want to try cargo bikes, so it's quite hard to take a guess at the general population, but I would expect that it's fairly similar to the issues around cycling in general, and I would imagine that it's fear of other traffic, to be honest. It's probably, you know, the same as the main barrier to cycling for transport, but I don't know. No one's actually done research on that, but also they are still quite unusual, and I think the social pressure to be sort of normal, I mean, I spoke about normal people in my presentation, but there still is a huge social pressure to, you know, a lot of people feel it, to sort of fit in with everybody else, and they still are quite niche. I mean, it is changing, and some parts of London and other parts of some cities there are lots of cargo bikes everywhere, but it's still sort of very much a certain set of people who are confident enough. So I think, yeah, fear of traffic and sort of not, you know, not wanting to sort of cycle for transport because it's not the kind of done thing that them and their friends in their communities do. But I do have lots of other ideas about barriers. I could mention some of them, but you want to get everybody's opinion.
Great, thanks, Alex. So over to you, Chris.
Yeah, I think it's really difficult to define one particular thing. But one of the things which kind of I touched on in my talk was about, I guess, access to other transport options. And that might be cars, but it's like the shared mobility. So, you know, a classic example, I sort of did a bit of research into whether or not we could have like a car share locally for families that wanted to get rid of their main car but only needed it occasionally. And it's a project that I'd still like to revisit at some point. But it's that access to other options, so that it's easy to jump on a tram or train or a bus to get places, so that the reliance on the car is reduced. And I think having that connected is also the key. Like, I mean, in Manchester we haven't got an Oyster card system yet. I'm hoping that it will come eventually, so that will make it easier for people. But you know, this is something that I've identified as being quite, yeah, I guess like an important element, certainly in our area, that families have actually said to me, if I could just have access to a car 1 or 2 days a week, you know, guaranteed, or 1 or 2 days a month, that would be perfect for me, and then the rest of the time I can cycle places.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, I think that's a question that a lot of people are thinking of now, especially with more people working from home and their cars just sitting on their driveways. So yeah, this different sort of transport approach definitely needed.
Yeah. And I also think that the more you do it, the less reliant you do become on a car, and you can realise what can be done with a bike.
Yeah, definitely. So over to you, Brent. Same sort of question.
Yeah, we did before we did the Big Birmingham Bikes project, which came before the e-cargo bikes. We actually did a survey in Birmingham of between 4,000 and 5,000 people, and unsurprisingly, cost was the top barrier. So you're quite right that. Hence why we worked with Raleigh to provide free bikes to residents in city. And once we'd removed the cost barrier, the next barrier was fear of the roads, followed by knowledge of actually where to go on the bike. Because if you've never used a bike before, you start using it for leisure purposes. And actually, a lot of the people in the hardest communities didn't know where the local park was, didn't know where the canal was, so they didn't know the nice places to go. So actually, what we've done over the last 5 or 6 years is just show people how to get to the nice places. And so some of the lovely pictures that you showed earlier, Alex, we've got lots of those from people who've discovered parks and open spaces for the first time. And so knowledge, I think for me, knowledge of where, and by removing the cost barrier, we're giving the greatest gift we can to everybody to get them out there, you know.
Thanks, Bryn. Yeah, I think definitely a difference when if you're so used to driving in a car somewhere, how do you get there by bike? And especially how do you do it in the safest way? Becky, do you have anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think space is a big consideration, because obviously some of the cargo bikes take up a fair bit of space. You don't have a garage or a large enough access to a garden that you can keep them in, and that can be a barrier. But I know some of the London boroughs have got on-street cycle hangers now. So whether there's you know, a lobby to be made for you know, the likes of people that are renting them out and selling them, actually there should be provision. If you can park your car on the street, why shouldn't you be able to park your cargo bike outside your house and feel safe that it's going to be there when you get back to it? Confidence as well, allowing people to have training on them, and buddy, you know. So if I had someone coming out at me and going, yeah, you're doing really well, hints and tips on how to use them, that would be really great. And routes as well. We've been working with the Canal and River Trust on a couple of our routes, and we've gone, come on, you know, these barriers are a right pain. Can we try just getting rid of them and see what the worst happens? You know, we're using them all the time. And they said, actually, yeah, we'll do a trial. We'll whip some out and see what the worst happens. And it'll be a test pilot that we can roll out. If we're successful in Birmingham, we can trial it at other places. So just being out there saying, we've been taking pictures of them going, look, you cannot get through here. Come on, let's do something about it. And they are willing to listen and help and support. And then just life course as well, as Alex said. Before I had my 2 kids, I used to cycle every single day. As soon as you got 2 little ones, the fear factor goes through the roof. So having someone there to say, this is the perfect bike for you, this is how you get those obstacles, you know, let's give you a handhold and make sure it's for you and give you a try with that. You know, if we had something like that around me, I would have probably let the wife let me spend £2 on the super duper bike I wanted to import from Holland, but I wasn't allowed at the time. So, pipe dream. Next lot. Thank you.
Thanks, Becky. Yeah, I think Alex definitely needs to become a nationwide store. I think we all need kind of someone helping us choose what bikes we want and giving us the opportunity to try before you buy. And yeah, those good recommendations. So Ed, over to you. Do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, pretty much just to reiterate everyone's comments, really. I think Bryn made a really valid point, and I think route planning, particularly on cargo bikes, is really important. But it's also important to see how much better they can make things in terms of the things that you see when you're on a bike, and regardless of whether it's a cargo or a normal bike. You know, you see so much more of the places that you live and work on a bike that you would do when you're in a car, just because you're so blinkered. And I think that's, like I said in my presentation, you know, the well-being factor that brings is massive. But I think the 2 major barriers that I've experienced working with local authorities and different organisations are definitely the initial upfront costs and the security on the roads. But hopefully that's being overcome by the funding that's available through gear change. Lots of segregated cycle lanes are making a real improvement, and hopefully that'll be a national rollout. And I think trying the bikes, you know, like I can't remember who it was, I think it might have been Alex, you know, cargo bikes are a really new entity to the UK market, and I think the more people that try them, whether it's families or businesses or whatever, if we can just get people trying them, I think there's a bit of a misconception still around e-bikes. So there's a piece of work to be done there, and a bit of a misconception that cargo bikes might just be a gimmick. So if we can just get people on the bikes, then I think, you know, we will grow, the market will grow massively.
Great, thanks Ed. And yeah, I totally agree. I think as well, it's that chicken and egg situation. The more you see of them, the more people that want to do that. But it's kind of getting it out there so more people become aware of them and start talking about them. So a question that was aimed at Alex, but I think Chris might have something to say about this, and maybe the other speakers. So we'll start with Alex. someone was asking, how do you insure your bikes, or what do you recommend to people in terms of insurance for the bikes? Because obviously, I know we've touched on it today already, that security is an issue, and they are expensive. So do you have any comments about insurance?
Sure, yeah, I'll assume that question is about an individual family insuring their own bike. Is that really what the question was? Was it a question about insuring them running a hire service? Because I do get that question quite a lot.
I think it was more, let's go for personal, and then if that person wants to find out more, they can throw us another question.
Sure, yeah, I mean, there are lots of insurance companies out there, and you just simply need to contact them and get quotes. I mean, there are some cycling specific ones. You know, we can't really recommend an insurer. You do just need to shop around and be specific. But my top tips would be, make sure you do fully insure it. Make sure you specify it's an cargo bike or an electric bike, if that's what you've got. And we, again, as I say, it's really hard to recommend, but some of our customers have found there's a company called LAKA, L-A-K-A. They were set up specifically for sort of unusual bikes, as I understand it, and it's a slightly different way of insuring. So you put the price per month fluctuates according to how many people are also insuring their bike on the scheme, and they can be quite. They have in the past been quite good for people who've had to lock the bike in the front garden, or potentially even just outside their house. But you have to go to them directly to ask. And there's also ETA, Environmental Transport Association. They were very good with us in the past before we kind of ramped up and ended up with a rather, you know, a more significant hire fleet, and we had to find a different commercial insurers. You just have to shop around, and you have to get, you know, my other top tips is, you know, insure the bike, get at least one gold or diamond sole secure bike lock. Most of the cargo bikes come with an integrated second lock anyway on the wheel, the good ones anyway, so you've always got two locks on the bike. You know, cover it, put a cover on it, hide it. The police do advise that's a really good thing to do for motorbikes and mopeds, because it literally out of sight, out of mind. It's harder for the thieves to sort of spot it. But yeah, I mean, on insurance we can't really recommend, but there's lots of things you can do to prevent theft. And then also we're starting to investigate GPS trackers and so on, but I mean, the insurance companies don't specify them, and it's really an individual thing as to whether you want to then sign up to a sort of monthly fee for an app on your phone and things like that. But that's something that some of our customers are investigating as well.
Great, thank you. Did anyone else have anything they would like to add?
Yeah, I guess, yeah, same, it's difficult, we can't really recommend, but I often tell people to start with home insurance to see if that works, but then also to get quotes from elsewhere. I do share like a sort of things to ask the insurance company, sort of useful questions with our customers, and it's things like who's insured. Some of the policies only insure an individual, some of them insure the people that live in your household. There is one policy that I know of that insures anyone that you nominate, which I think is really useful, because if like grandparents or friends are going to borrow cargo bikes, then knowing that they're insured is whilst they're out and about is reassuring. We internally at work, we have very different views on like how to lock and what is acceptable. I go for the belt and braces approach. I have 2 gold standard locks and a GPS tracker, which we pretty much sell with 90% of the bikes now. What I say to my customers is get the right insurance policy, do your research, put the locks on there, put the tracker on there, and then use it, and there's nothing else you can do. Otherwise you end up being fearful of using the bike, and you know, you just have to accept that it could happen, and you've done your best to prevent it. And I think what Alex mentioned actually is that yeah, making sure that if you have to leave it out, the policy does cover that, because not all policies allow you to leave the bike at the front of the house or outside all the time or overnight.
Yeah, it's very important for people to check the exact wording. We had a customer who nearly fell over when the policy provider wouldn't cough up because they said you didn't specify it was an e-bike, which is ridiculous. And I think she argued the case in the end. But you just have to be a bit careful, and as Chris says, do your research, get some quotes, look at the detail.
Great, thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? No. I think there's some questions coming through now about insurance and covering saying it's worth considering third-party insurance as well. And then some people also stating that, you know, they've had insurance on bikes and unfortunately they find out that it doesn't cover carrying passengers or doesn't cover carrying children. So there's definitely some issues, I think, here with insurance and you know, the third-party aspects and things like that. But I don't think that's a nice question to ask the panelists yet, so we'll come to that later on maybe. So a question that's come through is asking about, sorry, where's it gone? How community groups allow people to share e-bikes. So what sort of systems are in place, or maybe this is a good one for kind of Bryn and Becky. How have you found community groups managing kind of e-bike sort of hire as such, you know, whether online booking, physical keys, training, those sort of aspects? So Bryn or Becky?
Yeah, so through the group that I was talking about earlier, Oasis, they have a booking system of people who would like to use it. They have a delegation system as well, where they're asking staff members to go and do a particular task on the bike. But what they're doing when they're going out is they're telling lots of people in the community about it and encouraging other people to want to use it as well. So they have a booking system internally for the use of the bike, and that'll be exactly the same model that we will encourage other people to do. It's a really open system though. So as we've done with our bikes in the past, we try not to put any obstacles in the way. So, you know, if somebody does want to borrow a bike, they just have to show something, whether it's a phone number, and we have to know roughly where they live. But we try and remove all those obstacles, which is, I'm sure, very different from a lot of other people's models, but it's worked very well for the Active Wellbeing Society over the years, because what you then get is community protection for those things that you know, they know that they've got to look after them, because their own community will suffer if something goes wrong with those devices. So we've been pretty lucky with our supply of bikes over the years, and it seems to be working for them as well.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want anything to add? No?
We're hoping to get a cargo bike library in sort of Greater Manchester through the Energy Saving Trust. There's a sort of second round of funding that Manchester and Salford put in some applications, and they've been asked to resubmit. So hopefully, if that's successful, we'll have a cargo bike library, and hopefully we'll be running that as well. And we're going to be looking at other schemes and how they're working. But at the moment, the working idea is that we'll have almost like a members group, so people can apply to use those bikes on a sort of, either a long-term or a short-term basis. But certainly for the short-term basis, it might be users that just need it occasionally for their work needs or social needs. And once they've signed up and sort of gone through the training, then they can just book the bike as and when they need. So it doesn't have to be a long process each time. So that's the model that we're working on, and we're hopefully going to be using some technology to sort of streamline that process. But we haven't found the exact answer for that yet.
It's still in development.
Yeah, very much so.
Great, thank you. So a question, maybe Ed, I think you might be the best person to answer this one, being involved in the supply of these. But do you know of any options to maybe, you know, lease these e-cargo bikes rather than sort of purchasing them?
Yeah, it's a question that I get asked a lot. I think it relates back to the fact that the market is so new, and perhaps lenders are a little bit skeptical about their residual value. You know, it's not like a £40,000 electric van or vehicle. So what we focus on is you know, pushing people towards the option of spreading the cost, because I think what we do need to do is reiterate the fact that the life cycle of these products is pretty good. You know, the batteries, at minimum, their warranty with us as a manufacturer and motors for that matter is 2 years. So we'd expect you to get pretty much 2 years pretty trouble-free cycling out of one of these products, obviously with support and regular maintenance of the bikes. It goes without saying, but it's I think it's just the residual value of them that's a concern for the lenders. But to be fair, there are lots of finance options available, so that's probably the best way to spread the upfront costs. I think also it's really important to consider the cycle to work schemes that are available if it's family bikes. There's lots of really good providers out there that will allow individuals to spread the costs over a long period, and with cycle to work schemes, it's taken from your pre-tax salary, so you've saved the tax and national insurance on it. So there's some really good savings out there for the consumers.
Great, thanks very much, Ed. Question for Alex. Somebody has asked, can you tell us about your lending model and what kit is the most popular?
Gosh, okay, lending model. You mean the when we did the baby biking projects and the family cycling library in Hackney in London? Yeah, so essentially we applied for grant funding to run it, because I think, as Chris was saying, you can't really do it as a commercial side of your work. It doesn't make any money, but it's a really nice community project to run to really help families get continue to cycle or start cycling. And we basically applied for grant funding, and we were successful in a number of a small number of different sources. I mean, the model that we've run, we honed it over the years. We've been doing it for a few years now, first in Hackney and now in Waltham Forest, and we do really hope to expand. Is that we initially started with a month lending period, and we'd do it, sorry, my phone is ringing, just put that to one side. We initially did it sort of a 1 month lending cycle, and did an event once a month, and that works really quite well, actually. More recently, through the lockdowns, we've done a 2-week cycle, as it were, because people had a bit more time on their hands if they were furloughed or something to try the equipment out, so we do it that way. But we got a lot of the equipment, it was all donated, really. We've bought very little equipment. We got it donated from other parents, from a partner in the project who is a local volunteer, and she was brilliant at drumming up support and getting equipment for free. And we did do a call out for volunteers, because when we run the events, they can get a bit chaotic with lots of parents and children everywhere, so you do need quite a lot of person power to run them. So I'd think really carefully about running your own scheme and how you're going to manage it, and we did end up finding that running an indoors session often was a bit easier to sort of control what was going on, and it was obviously weatherproof. But yeah, we did need to get grant funding. We're looking at a way of creating a kind of membership club, so people could become a member for a really attractive low amount of money. Then they can borrow from the library, and then we do sell off the stock on a rolling basis, because it not for very much, but just because it gets out of date and we need to get more updated things, so then they can maybe get the money off the item and not be a member anymore, and then renew their membership and all this kind of thing. So that was really the model that we were working on. It was the grant funding, and and then now we're hoping to expand it and get a membership system.
Great, thank you very much. So a question that's come in about car sharing clubs, and interested to see if the panel have got any insights or answers for this person. But how receptive have current technology platforms been to incorporating an e-cargo bike into their options? So, for example, the person that's asked this question mentioned that in Oslo, Hertz provide their car club, and you get a discount if you then sort of hire the bikes. So do any of you know of any schemes like this, or how receptive car club providers are?
So the project that should be coming to Manchester, the e-hubs, they should have cars and cargo bikes, but they'll be on different platforms, I believe. But yeah, it's not uncommon. There are examples of it, as it were, but they are. I'm actually going back on what I said. They are few and far between. There's not loads of them, but they do exist. Yeah, I think it will just take time, but I do believe that in time these cargo bikes will just become another thing that we can hire out, you know, in the same way that the car club will happen, and hopefully this eHub project will demonstrate the ability for that to work.
Yeah, I completely agree, Chris. I think in the future, hopefully the not too distant future, it will be about lots of different transport industries working together to make things more efficient for, you know, whoever it is, you know, whether it's the weekend transport for leisure or indeed commuters. And I think part of that is definitely going to be mobility hubs. So, you know, places that link rail, bus transport, cargo bike sharing, e-bike sharing, you know, even e-scooters. There's lots of e-scooter trials going on. I know that a number of public access share companies are looking at the cargo bikes for their operations, and certainly the sort of bigger, more national providers of car and van hires. You know, a little while back we had some conversations with those types of industry operations, and there definitely is the appetite for it. I think, like a lot of things, or a lot of organizations looking at cargo bikes, it's all very new to the UK market, and I think until we've got the data and it's a bit more tried and tested, you know, it's coming. It might just take a little bit of time.
Great stuff, thank you. So question about storage, and one of the attendees has asked, for both residents and small businesses, secure parking for an e-bike is a huge problem. And I know that you think of cities and there's lots of terrace houses, and you know, where do you park them? So what thoughts does the panel have on this? So if we go to Alex first.
Yeah, that's a really good question. It is one of the biggest reasons why the customers that come to us agonize over which one to get. If you put cost aside, it can be a barrier, and we have had customers who've been moving house, and you know, they've obviously prioritizing where can I put a cargo bike in my new house, and that does affect which house they buy. You know, it's like having a car, I guess, and you know, if you need to have, you know, it'd be better to have somewhere secure to put it. But anyway, yeah, so it is an issue. Some of the cargo bikes that are not box bikes are getting more and more popular because you can much more easily like take them in the house, and one or two of them even fit in the standard bike shelters, one just about. So the long tail type e-cargo bikes like Turn is very popular. The GSD, which takes 2 children, the HSD, which can take 1 child on the back. They're really very much like sort of standard bikes, but on, you know, with a big motor and much heavier. And they're becoming more popular because of the storage solution that they provide. And also there's a brilliant Italian brand called Veloe, VELOE, and they do kind of town bikes on steroids. They're really elegant. They can carry up to 3 kids on them, and you know, you can carry them up a few stairs, you know. So more and more we're finding our customers are, you know, they're not going for box bikes. Box bikes are still really popular, but you know, the long tail bikes and the mid tail bikes are rising up the agenda. People with box bikes our customers tend to be able to get them in their front garden, and then lock them to a ground anchor or a wall anchor, and then cover them. You can't get trikes through the gate unless you widen your gate aperture, as I think Chris said in his presentation. So that trikes can be a bit more of an issue, especially with rented properties. You know, people who don't own their own property, that can be a real problem. They can't make the modifications. And then we do have a lot of customers who live in blocks of flats, and more these days with cycle parking guidance and planning and so on going in. More new builds have got better cycle parking, and you've got the London, the Transport for London's cycle design standards, which are integrated into the planning process. So new builds should have good communal bike parking that does take into account oversized bikes. So it's whether that's actually put in place by the developers. But it is a big problem. It is a problem. And if crime wasn't such an issue, it wouldn't be such a problem. So I don't want to hold the floor too much, but we have done pre-COVID. We started to do quite a lot of local work with the local police, and they were investigating cargo bike crime because there was just so much of it. And they are becoming really wise to the value of these vehicles and that they are relatively portable. And maybe thieves are switching from nicking motorbikes and mopeds to more to e-bikes. I don't know. It's a problem, but you know, it needs to be tackled from a number of angles. But yeah, storage, people are going a lot for the mid tails and the long tails now, as well as box bikes if they've got room for them.
Great, thanks, Alex. I'm just very aware of time, so rather than put that question to all the panelists, just as a sort of last question, which links to that one as well, we've had some questions about what the panelists think that could be done to make e-cargo bikes more mainstream. So whether that's subsidies, government campaigns, individual engagement, what sort of support is needed from DFT or other avenues to make e-cargo bikes more mainstream? And we'll do it the opposite way around this time. So let's go Ed first.
Yeah, I think there has, in the past, there's been some great work by the Department of Transport and the Energy Saving Trust and lots of organisations working together. And there's lots of things that obviously need to develop, like the infrastructure, like parking for cargo bikes, all sorts of different things. But I think fundamentally, it's about getting people trialling bikes, cargo bikes, whether it's a business or a family, in a really low cost, low risk way, to see if it can work for them. And some really good examples is the work that some local authorities have been doing, like Cambridge City Council. And they've actually got a try before you buy type scheme there that's ran by Outspoken Cycles, and it's a really great scheme. It's got family bikes from all different brands. It's got business bikes from, again, all different brands. And as I understand it, you can loan a bike for a couple of weeks at a really low cost. Obviously, Cambridge is a little bit of a bubble because they've got really good infrastructure. But the effects of that trial scheme have been really, really positive.
Great, thanks, Ed. So let's go to Becky. Becky's still there? Maybe we'll go to Bryn then.
Hi, everybody. I think responding to what Ed says, I completely agree, and that's kind of what we're trying to do in Birmingham, in effect, is give lots of people the chance to try. We did something similar with adapted cycles for people with disabilities over the last 2 or 3 years, and we did lots of things, but the main thing we did was had areas where people could come to and try them, so that there was lots of space and it was nice and safe for them to try, like athletics tracks and things like that. And what then happened was they would say, yes, they're great, we would like to find out if we can afford to buy one. So then we linked them with a number of organisations who could help them individually with grants. So I think that try in a safe environment, and obviously what we're trying to do is target it at groups who work with the most deprived communities. So for me, that would be the recommendation, is that the leading community groups who have the biggest kind of cohort of people have access to a bike. They look after the security of it, and then people from their organisations can use it. And then that could lead to, over a long period of time, more people who are thinking about e-cargo bikes. They may not all be able to afford them, but the first thing is getting them to think about it and understand the benefits, I think.
Great, thanks, Bryn. Yeah, get it in the communities and then get people going from there. Chris, do you have any views on what we can do to get e-bikes more mainstream, or what sort of the Department for Transport?
Yeah, the visibility and the trying is the common theme here. We've got a project running with some local businesses where, and it came out through COVID, and it's now becoming a standard offering for us to local businesses, where they can buy in a fleet of e-bikes or standard bikes. It doesn't have to be just e-bikes, and we run the whole project, or run the whole hire scheme for them. So we've got one with Salford Hospital, Salford University, and Manchester Foundation Trust have just started as well. And within that scheme, the individuals get 4 weeks to try the bike at no charge at all. And after 4 weeks, they can choose to go onto a low-cost rental. It's set at £15 a week at the moment, and for up to 3 months if they wanted to rent it. But this is all centred around behaviour change, and all of those organisations have a desire to get more people cycling for all the reasons that we know, better health and the environment and so on. So we've only just started those projects, but yeah, they're sort of showing good results at this stage. And then we've done other random ones as well, like we've taken over a multi-storey car park a couple of years ago, and we just had loads of bikes there for people to try. And it was just a novel place for people to come and try things in a sort of safe environment.
Great, thanks, Chris. Some great examples there, which I think can definitely be rolled out across to other locations. Alex, do you have any?
Yeah, I would turn that on its head really and say really if people want to invest in personal transport that can carry their young children around, or if people want to invest in a business vehicle, if it's harder to use a car or a van, it's more convenient to use 2 or 3 wheels instead, then people will naturally gravitate towards that. So I would say, politicians and the general public do need to support them in implementing a different infrastructure on our street environments. People need to have the guts to keep going with the low traffic neighbourhood trial schemes and keep them in place despite the naysayers, because that's really what changes people's behaviour, is the environment and what it's easy to do and what it's more difficult to do. Take out all those barriers, those that we saw in Chris's presentation, things like steps instead of ramps, those silly barriers to stop naughty young people on scooters and mopeds and stuff on canal towpaths. We've got to change the environment. So I would turn it on its head and say people naturally gravitate towards bikes and cargo bikes and e-bikes and so on when that is the easiest choice to make. And we certainly found that in our business during COVID, when people were basically told to get on their bikes ultimately, and didn't want to take public transport and didn't want to buy a car.
Great, thanks, Alex. And I think that's a perfect point, I think, to kind of sum this whole event up, really. So I would just like to thank all of the speakers for today. We do have lots of other questions that we've not managed to cover today, but these will be sent to the speakers. We will kind of put them all together and send them to the speakers, and hopefully then all the different speakers can maybe promote these on their social media channels, or we'll get the answers to you in some way or another. Just a few comments about some of the questions, that people talking about how security is an issue, insurance is an issue. Someone kind of providing some examples about how, in terms of security, the BikeMo, they won't actually insure people with debt issues, which I think is a significant problem, especially if we're trying to get e-cargo bikes to everybody and available to all people. So there's definitely some issues about insurance and security going on, in addition to all the infrastructure that Alex, you mentioned. So just to round everything up, thanks very much to Chris, Bryn, Becky, Alex and Ed. This has been a fantastic session. Thanks also to Landor Events for running this and facilitating it. Just want to remind all of the attendees that this will be uploaded to YouTube, and you will kind of get a recording available to you. So spread it, share the word, promote e-cargo bikes, because that's what we need. And also many thanks to Raleigh, who have supported this sort of series of webinars. So thank you very much, and that's the end of today.